everybody? Welcome back to Mac's Marquee Matchup. We have an excellent game on the slate here for week 2, in which the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be traveling to the Detroit Lions. I'm excited to get into this. We have 2 great fans to talk about each sides of these matchups. Obviously, a familiar face that'll be coming on, and one that's a new face to Win the Day TV. Certainly looking forward to talking with them. So let's get it started. First and foremost, I'm going to bring on TheMekoScott of Mr. Pride of Detroit, doing a lot of great things, doing some Detroit Lions football, a lot of content on there of Pride of Detroit. Make sure you guys check that out. They actually have a weekly preview space let's just say show for each of their kind of breakdowns of the schematic standpoints as the Lions weekly matchup. So certainly appreciate having you on, man, making your first appearance on the channel. Happy to have you, certainly. And, of course, representing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a guy that you see here every single Sunday for our Sunday morning previews, Mr. SpinDocSports. Happy to have you on as well, man. Thank you, both of you, for joining on. How are you guys doing today, man?
Good, man. I appreciate the invite. Glad to be here for the first time and really just excited to talk football with you guys.
Yeah. No, this is great. Love talking football, certainly love talking the Bucs, and actually, I'll just say it right now. Dan Campbell is my favorite coach in the NFL. Like not even close. Like
I feel like he should be everybody's at this point, right? I think everyone should kind of love Dan a little bit.
I mean, I look at coaches because I used to be one in basketball for many years, and obviously had many coaches when I played myself. But, my favorite coaches were always the ones where, like, literally they could look at you and be like, I want you to run through a brick wall today. And you'd be like, okay, coach, I'll just do it, just because you trust him that much. And that's what Dan Campbell has with his team. And like I said, I could not have more respect for Dan Campbell as a coach, man. Like you guys got a real one.
Yeah, man, it's been a great few years having Dan here. And again, like it's kind of like permeated throughout the city, right? Like Detroit is such a sports town, right? We have basketball, we have baseball, we have football, but at the core of it, like football always seems to reign supreme. And I think Dan Campbell being at the helm, along with, Brad Holmes and Sheila Hamp, have really kind of just reinvigorated the city. So it's been a really great few years to be a Detroit Lions fan for sure.
Yeah, look, and you speak obviously about Dan Campbell and kind of the culture set that he has brought to the Detroit Lions of being able not only to have the belief in everybody around you and oneself and the belief in the coach and what he's going to tell you to do and lay out that plan. You got to give him a lot of credit. From day one, he owned what the Detroit Lions were in the past and what he wanted them to be in the future. And certainly you guys are in that position to be, a contending team, certainly into the future. And also I got to give a lot of credit to what the Buccaneers have been able to build down there. I think they've been one of the more underrated drafting teams in most recent years. And also, they currently have the 3rd longest streak as far as the playoffs are concerned. They've consistently found ways to be in the playoffs, even as they've down it. And certainly going into last year, obviously, a lot of people, were kind of down on what the Bucs, as far as expectations were concerned, spin going into the season. But all they did was go out there, win enough games to win the NFC South. Got to give them a lot of credit because they beat the Eagles in the first round and then obviously matched up with the Detroit Lions in divisional round. And we'll kind of talk about that in general, but Spin, as it pertains to the Buccaneers and those expectations that you guys exceeded last year going into now this year, how are you feeling about the team overall? Obviously coming off a blowout win against the Commanders in week 1, but just in general, you guys continuing for the division and what your expectations are for how this season, could possibly turn out as far as January is concerned.
A lot of big time Bucs fans like myself really operate with kind of a four-word mantra, and that in Light we trust. Jason Light, our GM since 2014, he has complete support of the ownership of the Glazer family, and he was the one who was made the big push to get Brady here. He was the one that he's drafted. In the same draft, he drafted Tristan Wirfs and Antoine Winfield, and he all of his stuff is predicated on building through the draft, drafting well, and then playing what I call cap gymnastics when guys get up to the time where it's time to re-sign them. We did it with Godwin this year when we franchised him. We've done it with he's been a big proponent of the void year on a contract, which you can spread out a bonus so you can get more room under the cap. They did that with Brady. He is exceptionally good at two things. Number one is finding talent in the draft. And number two is being able to be creative, still within the rules, but be creative with the salary cap. And, in the modern day NFL, especially in a division like ours, which, let's just be real, hasn't been the most competitive division over the last 4 or 5 years. Not to say that we haven't earned it, but he's done a really nice job of putting together a balanced team. So, like, I won't sit here and say we have a top 10 offense. I won't sit here and say we have a top 5 defense, but both of our teams, or both of the sides of the ball for us, are top half, both in both areas. And that's made us good enough, certainly good enough, to get that 9 to 10 win plateau to win the division, and then also get some non-divisional wins as well. But I think that what he really invested in last year that really paid off for us were two things. Number one, he took a chance on Baker Mayfield. That obviously paid off big. And number two is that he invested in both lines. Light's always been a proponent that the game is in the trenches, right? The game's won in the trenches. You got to start on the line. So we re-signed Vita Vea. We re-signed Tristan Wirfs. We drafted Kalijah Cansey. All these, we turned Joe Tryon-Shenka into a hybrid rusher. And all of those guys just fit so well with the speed rush scheme that we have and with the zone blocking scheme that we have. So I give Light a lot of credit for recognizing where with a team like Tampa that primarily does have to build through the draft. I mean, it's not exactly like a sexy destination for free agents, but he's done a really nice job of combining a few free agents here and there, but mostly building through the draft and then being creative with that salary cap when it comes time to re-sign those guys. A lot of Bucs fans like that I'm on forums and I'm in spaces with and everything did not think that we'd be able to keep all of our primary free agents from last year. So we wouldn't be able to keep Baker, Wirfs, Mike Evans, Godwin, all those guys, and Light found a way to keep every single one of them and keep the team together. So, as far as my expectations for this year, third straight NFC South, that's really the only thing that's acceptable at this point. As far as what our outlook is in the playoffs, should we get there? It's way too early to tell that so far. We have a lot of young guys in a lot of key spots, specifically in our secondary. And I'll talk about that when we get to the game itself, because we have a few holes on that this week that are really going to hurt us, I think. I personally, if you're asking for like what my floor and my ceiling are for the Bucs and what my expectations are, it's the exact same thing all around. It would be however many wins it takes to win the NFC South, and then whatever happens from there. I'll be happy if we can raise that South flag for the third time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfectly fine way to look at it. And certainly as far as your GM is concerned, being able to transition in and out of kind of phases within your franchises is certainly for you guys, and as much as it hurts me to admit, obviously beat us handily in the Super Bowl a few years ago, and transitioning out of being a Super Bowl contender, but losing some of those aging vets, those high-priced vets, and still being able to replace that talent effectively. It's a mark of a good GM, and certainly being able to manage the cap effectively to keep some of your talent in-house. Again, another feather in that GM's cap, and he certainly deserves the credit for doing so. And I've always been impressed with what your front office has put together, and certainly being, again, on top of the NFC South is a reasonable expectation and one that you guys are hoping to achieve. So transitioning over to a team, obviously in the Lions, that exceeded expectations to an extent, I'll say last year, but certainly then kind of pushed the bar a whole lot higher, getting to the NFC Championship game. Obviously, the Lions have been long maligned as far as the franchise is concerned. A few down years, to say the least. A little bit of a drought since you guys have seen this level of success. But first, talk about the kind of ride that last year was, and for you guys to have achieved what you guys achieved, and what do you guys are looking at pinpointing for being able to take that next step and truly becoming a Super Bowl contender, a team that's going to be there for the last game in February and what you want to accomplish this year?
Yeah, I mean, looking back at last season, it felt like a dream. I think in a lot of ways. I kind of said it at the beginning, like since Dan's been in Detroit, it's been consistent improvement. He's definitely delivered on everything he said in that viral press conference when he's talking about, biting kneecaps and all of these types of things. He's delivered on every bit of like bringing forth a team that is going to compete. Obviously going from 3-13-1 and then going to winning 9 games and then eventually last year getting to the point where, you're winning the division and you're competing in the playoffs and winning playoff wins. Every step of the way, it really did just kind of feel like a dream, starting off with, again, beating, the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football, or I think Thursday Night Football, I'm sorry. And like, that was just in itself, like, wow, like we really might have something here. Yes, Travis Kelce wasn't playing, but it was still just like a feather in the cap for Lions fans. Like, hey, we belong. And every win along the way was just like confirmation of that. There were bumps in the road, obviously losing to Seattle, losing to the Ravens in very embarrassing fashion along the way. But like throughout that season, I remember doing videos with again, my guy Morgan over at Pride of Detroit, and us constantly coming back every week and just being like, when we lost games, it's like you could tell what went wrong. It was so tangible to see, hey, the offensive line didn't play well. Hey, they didn't get the running game going here. The Lions secondary was constantly up and down last year. And so it was very tangible to see. And it was just like, hey, if this team can get to a point when they are just rolling, you just felt like they could do something special. And so, yeah, getting to the playoffs and playing Matthew Stafford and the Rams in the wild card round was, again, high emotion, very similar to like it was last week on Sunday Night Football. So there was so much emotion going into that game. But once the Lions kind of slayed that beast and got over that hump, you just really felt like, man, like this could be the run. If there's ever a time for the Lions to make a run for the Super Bowl, this might be the one and only opportunity for that. And again, going up against the Bucs for the second time in that season, and knowing that it was going to be a tough game because the first game was tough and the first game was a really grueling battle. And then getting to that NFC Championship game was like, again, you just felt like at any point in time, if the ride ended, you felt like, man, but it's been one hell of a ride. And didn't end the season the way we wanted it to, obviously being up against the 49ers in the first half and really, again, putting on display for the country that like, hey, this Detroit Lions team is not just a flash in the pan. Like this may be the making of a true Super Bowl contender. So yeah, it was funny, SpinDoc, to hear you kind of talk about your Bucs and talk about your GM, because to hear those types of things, it's very reminiscent of how we view, our GM and the way that Detroit has been building the last few years, where it's a lot of building through the draft. It's been a lot of, playing, magic tricks with a salary cap and finding, high quality vets and free agency to kind of just reshuffle the deck. And so going into this season, it is a lot of expectation put on this team, this coaching staff, these players, on not just accomplishing what we accomplished last year, but taking it a step further, right? Punching that ticket and getting to the final dance. And that's lofty expectations for a team, like you mentioned, that hasn't had a ton of success in recent memory. But everything feels new in Detroit, every single thing. And so it's a saying that I believe the radio broadcaster here in Detroit has been saying, that like, hey, Lions fans have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I know for me and a lot of Lions fans, I know like that's been the biggest challenge of this year, is getting comfortable with the fact of like, no, this team is a contender, and to hold them to that standard, to expect them to go into, whether it's matchups where they're favored or matchups where they're not favored, and still expect this team to perform at a high level that'll eventually, land them in the playoffs and hopefully in a Super Bowl.
Look,
It's interesting that you bring up that point too, Miko, because when the Bucs won their first Super Bowl in 2002, I mean, I've been a fan since like the 80s, since I was a kid. And when they won that first Super Bowl in 2002, which was the year that they brought Gruden in, the Bucs had been so bad for so long. And then they had that little playoff run. They had that wild card run where we lost to Philadelphia like 4 years in a row with Tony Dungy. And, I remember so many fans around that time were just kind of like, well, they gave it their best shot, and because they're so used to being so bad that they're like,
Yeah.
oh shucks, it was good. And Gruden came in, and Gruden was like, no, that's not good enough. And that's kind of what I think that Dan Campbell has done, is to be, it's the old it's the old adage of expect victory. You should expect to win. You should expect to be successful. And no, just getting there and just kind of, well, we gave it a good try and whatever. And that was Gruden's attitude, was like, with a team this talented, that is not acceptable. What's acceptable is to go on and on and on. And that's why I love that both the fans and the team has that attitude. Because like I said, that's the exact attitude that Gruden shifted back when he took over for Dungy in 2002. And obviously it paid off.
Yeah, it's been really, like I said, it's exciting to see it. It's very rare that I think you see a fan base and a team so aligned, right? Like oftentimes when fans are screaming about like, oh, you guys should be punching your ticket to the playoffs and you guys should be winning the division and this, that, and the third, you typically hear the team, the coaches, the players, kind of maligning the fans and say like, oh, they don't understand how difficult it is. And in actuality, you've heard a lot of players, a lot of members on this coaching staff say like, no, that's the expectation. We hold ourselves to that level of performance each and every week. So I think it again makes Sundays in Detroit so electric, whether it's in Detroit or on the road. Like that's what makes those games so electric, because there is an expectation for this team to show up week in and week out.
Yeah, and that's excellent to hear. And I love these stories in sports in general, but also the NFL, because I feel like things go through the cycle in which you get the right people in place and it can change the entire look of a franchise from that aspect. And obviously, related to me as a Chiefs fan, and majority of the beginning part of my fandom, we were just solid team, and sometimes we'd be better than that. But specifically in 2012, we were as rock bottom as it possibly can get. And it took a guy in Andy Reid to believe in us, and obviously to try and change the entire culture of this team to be a good franchise from that standpoint moving forward. And then adding on top of it, fast forwarding to what Patrick Mahomes did and changing, like, okay, now you have the coach that believed in this team. You have the coach that, believed in the front office. We can get the draft talent in. Now you have the quarterback that you feel can take you over the top. And I think the parallel here specifically for the Lions is getting Jared Goff and obviously trading away Matthew Stafford. It was an interesting shift of, hey, Dan Campbell came in. He said, this is the guy. We believe in you wholeheartedly. We're going to build this around you. We're going to make sure the trenches are solid. We're going to give you the opportunities in the middle of the field to attack. We're going to give you a good run game. And that belief at that point in Jared Goff's career, I think, has doubled back and paid huge dividends, because he's now in a position where he believes in the team and the coach in the same way, and he walks around with a certain confidence. And you got to give credit. Jared Goff is a guy that's been to a Super Bowl. He has gone through that gauntlet, for better or for worse, with the Rams as well. He's not somebody that's new to this. And so there is a certain level of expectation and confidence that can come with that as far as competing in January. And I think it also does apply to the Bucs as well. You guys believed in Baker Mayfield when a lot of people had thrown him away. And I think you've started to see, certainly week one, that swagger is back for Baker Mayfield, and he's playing with a certain level of confidence. And that's pretty cool to see as far as the culture for both of these teams coming together. So as that all is said, obviously coming up for this matchup here on Sunday, obviously in Detroit, Buccaneers travel to the Lions. The Lions are a 7.5-point favorite. We will start specifically on the Lions side of the ball and when they have the ball. Obviously, Jared Goff is a quarterback that we talk about, needs to be protected well to deliver the ball on time. Obviously, the Lions want to establish the run. The Buccaneers are an excellent run defense, really have been the entirety of Vita Vea's career specifically. But there is a certain attitude that Todd Bowles brings to the table as the head coach and defensive play caller. So in this specific instance, we're going to start out here with Spin and talking about what he's watching for when the Lions have the football and what Todd Bowles can bring to the table to try and get them off their game. Obviously, stopping the run on early downs and being able to put them in difficult situations on passing downs.
Yeah, that's first and foremost, especially because we will be without Antoine Winfield. He's out for this game, as is Kalijah Cansey. So 2 starters down already, 1 speed rusher, and who I think is I'm biased, but best safety in football. So we're down a few right off the top, but definitely stopping the run to set up, because one thing that Bowles is one of the most blitz happy coaches and coordinators, play callers on the defensive side. He'll bring pressure from anywhere. And that's where I think that we're going to feel the loss of Winfield, because some of the speed rush that we had, especially on the left side with Joe Shoyenka, can actually open up the door for Winfield on those safety blitzes. But obviously we won't have him now. So, one thing that the Bucs didn't really have to do a whole lot of was play a lot of solid pass defense, like man-to-man pass defense, just because Jaden Daniels, obviously he's a rookie and he showed some great flashes with his athleticism, with his escapability, etc. But he is still a rookie and he threw like a rookie. And so we could just go single coverage pretty much across the board and know that the quarterback, like really the only threat that the quarterback had was running, which you saw in Jaden Daniels' rushing stats. So obviously Jared Goff is not really a rushing quarterback, but we have to really just completely flip the script for this one because of the threats in the passing game. I also say that too, because looking at the cornerback matchups to the Lions receivers, right now per Pro Football Focus, Amon-Ra is projected to see 21 snaps against Tyke Smith. That's not a good one. That's not a good thing for us because Amon-Ra has a significant advantage here, both in height and in just overall talent against Smith. So, I wouldn't be Bowles isn't really big on having guys shadow. If he did, I would hope that he would have Jamal Dean follow him around. But the Lions have so many weapons to begin with that I think what we're going to have to do is I think that we're going to have to bring a lot of exotic blitzes. I think that Goff, to me, is a quarterback that you can force into bad decisions when you pressure him, but we have to get that pressure first. And with the strength of the Lions' offensive line in comparison to ours, I think that we're going to have to bring just a lot of pressure from a lot of different places and really play the mental game of confusing Goff and forcing him into maybe throwing it before he's ready, maybe making a bad throw, just because we, aside from the starters being out, is that I think that the Lions offensive line matches up pretty well with our front four. I'm not as concerned about the run stuffing just because we have Vita Vea, and I mean he takes up like two and a half guys by himself. What I'm more concerned about is the play action, and I'm specifically concerned about guys like Laporta getting out on those middle routes and some of the guys on the outside, especially when we're not going to have Winfield over the top, and we won't have him in a safety blitz either. So I think that if we can get a lot of exotic and creative pressure, then we can give our offense just enough possessions. But if we're going to bring first of all, I think if we're going to sit back in coverage, we're going to get carved up. And second of all, I think if we bring all those pressures and it doesn't work, then we might be in for a couple early scores by the Lions, which honestly, if that's the way it happens and we're at least throwing everything in the kitchen sink at them, I can be okay with.
Certainly understandable. So flipping over, obviously, when you're looking at this, do you feel like it's more important, and obviously the answer is going to be both, but do you feel like it's more important to get Laporta and Amon-Ra going in the middle of the field from the pass game, or really establish a run game versus what is a really difficult run defense front from you guys' perspective in this game on Sunday?
I'm of the opinion that the Lions really do need to get the run game going. In two matchups so far against the Bucs, they haven't been able to do it at a high level, right? The Lions have been effective. They've had effective runs against the Bucs, and especially, looking back at that playoff matchup, Jahmyr Gibbs getting a really nice run and getting a touchdown off of that and things of that nature. But when you start to just look at the box score, and in terms of yards per carry, like the Bucs have been one of the harder teams for the Lions to actually be able to get the, those 4-5 yards per carry type of numbers. And so while they've been victorious in those two matchups, I still think at this Lions core, that is still what they want to do. They still want to be able to get into favorable, third and short type of situations or second and short type of situations so that they can go to that play action and then start to utilize Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta in the middle of the field. But you also now have the emergence of Jameson Williams, really coming into his own in his third year. So if things aren't necessarily working on the middle of the field because the Bucs decide to take that away or try to take that away from Jared Goff, JG at least is showing confidence and being able to air it out to JMO like he did last week against the Rams. And if that becomes the matchup, the Lions have no problem going to that well, and they'll go to it as often as they possibly can.
Yeah. And that makes total and complete sense. And ultimately, I think I agree with you from the standpoint of it being able to establish the run, again, keeps you out of those exotic looks. We know what Todd Bowles can do to offensive lines from a pressure package standpoint. And you do not want to be in a lot of third and longs versus, Todd Bowles defenses. That's just not where you want to live. So staying out of the, those situations where he can come at you from all different angles and dial those things up is going to be important and give you opportunities to obviously use Jameson Williams as a guy who in week one had a long touchdown, obviously a little bit of a breakout game, somebody that the Lions now want to rely upon as far as wide receiver too. So I wouldn't be surprised necessarily for them to try and dial up some shots as far as that's concerned, because, obviously the blitz leaves you vulnerable in certain times if you get it blocked up. But I know the Lions don't want to live in a space in which Todd Bowles can kind of do things, as I'm going to show here, that they ended up doing to Jaden Daniels and being able to send Levante David right up the A-gap and give him a lot of different issues. And we also did see kind of similar things as far as the Bucs and Lions in the playoff matchup as well. Where you kind of spread out, get some, gap pressures. And if your running back kind of rolls right by, as Austin Eckler ends up doing, your quarterback can have 54 right in his face. And this is the play from last year's divisional round game where David ends up taking on the running back and is able to get on Goff quicker than they can find an open man and ultimately give them some issues from that standpoint. And so if you give yourself those difficult situations, Todd Bowles is going to get you a few times. And ultimately speaking, if the Buccaneers offense puts enough points, that could be a recipe for upset if you give up too many of those, third down situations where you're getting blitzed to death and they end up getting off the field. But flipping, the Buccaneers have the football, I should say. Obviously, but Baker Mayfield, great game versus a Commander secondary that is less than ideal, I'll say, to put it nicely. And they certainly dominated from that aspect. Lions had fought tooth and nail versus what is, Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay, Cooper Kupp. Obviously, Puka Nacua goes out in that game, but still, Kyron Williams, a team that can be very dangerous on the offensive end. I'll start with you, Meko. What did you see from your Lions defense? And obviously you spoke about some of the secondary woes you guys had specifically last year. Did you see improvements from that standpoint that were encouraging? And now going up against what is, a different matchup, but still a very talented, Buccaneers wide receiver core. What do you want to see on Sunday from you guys in that secondary specifically?
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 with this Lions secondary. I'm going to be completely honest with you, because on one hand, I do believe they are better and they are more talented. When you start to look at both corner spots, you start to look at what they're doing at safety, and when you start looking at what they have at nickel, being able to get Carlton Davis from the Buccaneers, it was a huge get for them because they have a more true, CB1 out there that can line up against, the best wide receiver, and he has that veteran experience. And obviously he's dealt with some injuries, but when healthy, he has been one of the more lockdown corners. So it's a real good get for the Lions to have that. Obviously, drafting Terrion Arnold out of Alabama was another huge get. And I believe both of those guys played really well, right? They tackled well. They defended the run well. Terrion got hit with a couple pass interference penalties, which is to be expected. He's a rookie corner. He's, going up against Cooper Kupp. You're going to get hit with a couple of those, right? Like, you just kind of have to tip your cap at those matchups. But going into this matchup against the Bucs, this is the thing that does have me a little nervous, is because I think this secondary is still figuring it out. They're still understanding, and Aaron Glenn is still understanding what he can and can't do with this defense as a whole, where most of us as Lions fans know that, like, hey, AG would prefer to go man up, safe, two safeties back, covering deep and things like that, and give pressure with either the front four or sending an occasional blitz here or there. But he just doesn't know if he can do that with these guys yet, right? And so I think as the weeks kind of go on, we'll be able to understand, okay, how much can Terrion Arnold, handle? What matchups should we try to keep him away from, and things of that nature. And that's why this matchup does have me a little concerned, because I do think part of what went wrong with the Lions last week was, again, a little bit of like a bad matchup. You got one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, in my opinion, in Matthew Stafford, and one of the best wide receivers in the NFL in Cooper Kupp, doing what they do best. And it was literally just like, hey, we're going to take everything short. We're going to make you guys tackle, and we're going to break a couple, big runs here and there. I think the Bucs have the same capability of doing the exact same thing. When you look at Godwin and Mike Evans, they are matchup nightmares. They are there is no weakness on the field. They do a lot of really creative things with both of these wide receivers, where they will put them next to each other and make your corners and safeties have to really be on the same page in terms of communication. And if they're not, they will gash you. They'll either hit you deep, they'll hit you short. And it's a lot of things that I think AG is going to have to go over with this secondary of like, hey, you guys have to know your responsibilities. You have to know your cues. You have to talk to one another. Otherwise, it's going to be a long day. My opinion, and like what, we talked about last time on the Pride of Detroit channel, is like, I wouldn't be surprised the Lions make a decision. Like, one of these guys is going to hurt us and the other one just can't. And that's kind of what the Lions did in the playoff game. Mike Evans went off over 140 yards, I believe, and a touchdown, but they contained Chris Godwin. And so I could see the same thing kind of being the recipe, where it's like, hey, one of these guys is going to have to be in check. Now, I think with Carlton Davis going up probably against Mike Evans the most, you probably are in a better situation where it may not be a $147, but it's still going to be a tough day for him, either way that you kind of look at it. So, between getting that secondary to continue to make strides of improvement, but also looking at that front four that gets DJ Reader back this week, there's a lot of tantalizing things in terms of what that front four could potentially do to help that secondary by getting more pressure, being able to do a lot of the things that they were able to do to Matthew Stafford last week, which is constantly being in his face, constantly getting hits on him and speeding up his clock. And again, I agree with what you were saying earlier about Baker Mayfield. He's playing with confidence. He's definitely proving a lot of people wrong by playing at such a high level. But we can all kind of be a little honest. He doesn't have necessarily like that Matthew Stafford level of arm talent. So I think you start getting pressure on him, you start putting hits on him, we'll start to see that wane. Maybe not in the second quarter, maybe not necessarily even the third quarter, but by the fourth quarter, some of those throws might get a little errant just because, like, hey, I've been getting hit by Aiden Hutchinson for 4 quarters and this just isn't fun anymore.
Yeah, look, you mentioned that as far as Baker Mayfield is concerned, and that confidence sometimes can get him into trouble when he tries to make throws that he necessarily, doesn't have that arm talent to make. But again, that does also create throws that other guys wouldn't dare make, and that can lead to big gains even so. And obviously, when you have Godwin and Evans, 2 matchup nightmares, as you talk about, that gives you advantages over a lot of secondaries. But of course, that goes with the flip side of, can you hold up in the trenches? Obviously, DJ Reader coming back. Is that interior offensive line going to be as good? Do we see of something that I think you guys specifically in week 1 versus us last year, Aiden Hutchinson moving inside to try and take advantage of some mismatches as well? Do we see some of that on passing downs to try and give a little bit of a different look to that offensive line and, also stay away from attacking Tristan Wirfs, who is one of my favorite tackles in the NFL, of course. Spin, what are you looking at as far as obviously you guys having the ball? How are you going to attack? And how much of the run game does play into this, but obviously specifically Godwin and Evans. And do you feel confident in both of those guys both have a good game on Sunday?
Well, I'll share with you my number one worry about Sunday, and it's a big one. It's we are going to be without right tackle Luke Godke. He's already been ruled out. Concussion protocol. He's not going to clear by Sunday. And Baker Mayfield talked about it as well, because that's his guy. That's his, you talk about the blind side, right? Like, that's his Michael Orr. And not only is he one of the best offensive linemen that we have, I would say he's probably our second best one behind Wirfs, but he's our enforcer. And, like, compare it to a hockey team where you have the defenseman, right, who's a big, nasty guy who's going to go up and hit you and talk smack and impose your will. And that's what Godke does. And his backup, Justin School, is, let's just say he's a replacement level talent. I'm not trying to hate on the guy, but he is a replacement level talent. And so when we're going to get rushes I would assume primarily from the right side, from Hutchinson, is that is very, very scary, because last year in the divisional game, Godke handled Hutchinson or went one-on-one with him almost the entire game. Hutchinson 1 sack and 4 tackles, and largely was held in check, and also was held in check. The offensive line held up so that we could get Evans on those deep routes, because Mike Evans, to me, he's the best wide receiver we've ever had. He's a Hall of Famer. And to me, I will always remember Mike Evans as just being able to make some of the craziest catches over guys in traffic, up and around guys. Just goes all around to do it. The one thing he doesn't have and has never had throughout his entire career, and Godwin doesn't really have it either, is we don't have blazing speed. So when you combine a banged up offensive line with the incredible rushing ability of Hutchinson, and our top 2 receivers are elite, to me, they're elite receivers, but they're not speed demons. That's why we drafted Jalen McMillan. That's why we drafted Bucky Irving in the backfield, is so that we could balance out some of that skill and some of those shorter, yards after catch routes, and just get burners and just get guys that can take the pressure off of them. It's a little harder to do when you don't have your top offensive lineman in. The other big thing is that this is going to be a big challenge for our new offensive coordinator. So Canales was our offensive coordinator last year, went to Carolina as the head coach, and was replaced by Liam Cohen, who ran a very, very similar type of offense, but this is his first NFL job. And so he has a tall task on Sunday about how to handle this with some of the guys out that we have. He's already said that he wants to get the offensive tackle some help so we don't get killed on the edge. And so what that probably means is that we're going to keep a tight end next to School. And it also probably means that we're not going to have as many empty backfields, nor are we probably going to be able to utilize Bucky Irving like we did against Washington because of their lack of pressure. So Bucky Irving, kid from Oregon, just an absolutely joystick, just a weapon. And if Detroit wanted to bring some of those pressures, we could utilize him in the screen game. But what's going to be tough is if we have to keep a tight end in the box, then we're probably going to have to go with either Rachaad White in the backfield, who's bigger and more of a blocking back, or who can be a blocking back, and that's less Bucky Irving. So that's my biggest concern for us. And my other concern then too is that is Baker going to be comfortable with throwing those short, safe passes? Because I still think we can move the ball with the receivers and the size that Godwin and Evans have with short, quick passes. But both of you guys said it, and I agree with completely. What made Baker so effective last year was, one, his offensive line held up and he could make his reads and his throws. And two is that there weren't many plays drawn up where he's basically rolling out and making all kinds of decisions. You guys both hit on it. I agree completely, is that when the play breaks down and Baker has to just get out and just draw it up in the dirt and do something, that is not his strength. That's what led to a lot of his interceptions last year. And even if you go back and further and watch back when he was with the Rams or even in Cleveland, that's what led to a lot of his interceptions, when he has to overthink things. So Canales did a good job slowing it down. It was slowed down last week for him. My biggest concern is that the Lions are going to speed the game up, which causes Baker's decision-making to go down, and he's trying to make throws that aren't there, which the Lions defense, I think, is pretty opportunistic, which can lead to turnovers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good thing to harp on specifically, because it's tough. There may be opportunities, even though Campbell and Anzalone, solid linebacker duo as far as the Lions have, but there may have been opportunities, if you felt really comfortable with the pass protection, to get some mismatches with Bucky Irving, because like you said, he's a human joystick and able to create some of those things, and you guys used it effectively versus Commanders. Now it feels like the weight is going to be a little bit more on short, intermediate passes, making sure you're hitting Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And obviously you had the conversation about Chris Godwin or Mike Evans going off in that playoff game last year. But I also noticed a little bit of when Chris Godwin was able to get a few of his catches, it was really when the Lions were stuck in zone, and they were a pretty heavily cover 3 team last year. And they also had a fairly high rate of cover 1 as well when they did go man from those standpoints. But Chris Godwin's a guy that has that great feel for coverage and be able to find those soft spots in the zone. And we saw kind of throughout that playoff game in which those times in which he was able to get those, 5 to 10 yard, catches in the short to intermediate that Baker loves to take as far as the quick game is concerned, because he can operate within structure very well. And that's where Godwin kind of, is able to present to him. And specifically, when you get Godwin in motion to kind of mess with the defense and their coverages, that on top of it makes it even harder. So being able to add those things to the table are going to be important to me. And the secondary part of it is how much do the Lions trust their man coverage? Because that was how they got the red zone pick versus Matthew Stafford on Sunday Night Football last week, is playing that cover 2 man. And it was a little bit more of a smaller shell because obviously the condensed aspect of red zone. But Cooper Kupp in motion, obviously Stafford's kind of looking to get it to him in that sense, and he comes back late, and it is too late, and they have that extra safety there. So if you're able to find those mismatches and get it over the middle of the field, then you can kind of fool the quarterback into going into multiple reads if you cover the first read, effectively. But again, you talk about what the Bucs did week 1. They had Godwin in motion on a significant number of snaps and created a lot of mismatches against the Commander secondary. And Baker Mayfield is happy to take those short to intermediate throws within structure to kind of burn you from that standpoint. So that's really the key thing for me, is obviously Mike Evans is kind of he's going to get his type of guy at a certain point. But how often do the Lions go to a mismatch of that man coverage? And how often do the Bucs, can they get them kind of, catch them in that change-up coverage of that man coverage, and possibly get Godwin going in the short to intermediate game within structure for Baker Mayfield to operate as well. So that being said, always fun to go through a little bit of X's and O's with you guys. We'll get to a little bit of the fun part of the segment, the part of the segment that I'm sure Spin is extremely happy about, the best bets for Bucs at Lions coming up here on Sunday. Meko, you can go ahead and start out as the man we are welcoming in here as a guest to Win the Day TV.
Yeah, I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. I had to tap in with my guys over at Pride of Detroit because they're the gamblers. I do not gamble on my team. I do not. I value my money a little too much to even look at the
outside sources are perfectly fine. No issues here. Come on with it.
But no, so the line or the prop bet that I think is really interesting here, it goes back to Jameson Williams. Like we said, had a really breakout game last week, but going into this game, he is about, I think, plus 100 to go over 50 yards. And I think that's a really good bet for JMO, considering the fact that the 2 games that they have played against the Bucs, he's had at least 1 reception over 20 yards. So it almost was like, hey, 20 yards is already in the bank. He's now elevated himself to that wide receiver 2's position. So Jared Goff has more trust in him. They're going to go and they're going to feature him a lot more. And with that speed that he has, even if it is a 5-yard dump off, you always have that potential with his speed that's going to turn into 15, 20 more yards. So I think that's a really good safe bet, as well as there's also the likelihood that they're also having JMO. I think the DraftKings had him at plus 100 again for I think under 3.5 catches. So I think that's another really good line to take, because I think he is just going to be featured more and more in this offense as teams focus on Amon-Ra St. Brown and they focus on Sam Laporta. JMO's just going to find his opportunities, and he's riding high right now after last week's game. So I see no reason for him to, kind of come back down to earth with less than that at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. JMO is one of those guys. A, is electric and very fun to watch play, but B, is incredibly important to what the Lions can do to take their offense and their overall team to the next level. If he's a guy that can be a consistent wide receiver too, because of his threat of his speed, then that brings your offense to a different stratosphere as far as what they can do in the playoffs as well. Spin, what about you? What's your best bet for Bucs and Lions this week?
One from each side. From the Lions side, this one was actually pretty easy for me, even though I do like the Jameson Williams look, is Aiden Hutchinson to record a sack or over 0.75 sacks is minus 110 right now on DraftKings. I talked about it before, but my biggest worry. We might put tight ends in next to him, and we might have an empty backfield. But look, this is one of the best pure athletic pass rushers in the NFL, going up against basically a second tier average offensive lineman, and all you need is one sack. At some point, I fully expect Hutchinson to get one. He got one last year against Godking, and when we had our full offensive line intact. So Hutchinson to record a sack is it's over 0.75 sacks, but basically if your book only has 2 record a sack, that is just fine too. And then on the Bucs side, I do believe that we will be put in a situation where I'm not entirely confident we'll be able to run the ball effectively. Rashad White only averaged 2.5 yards per carry last week. I talked about maybe we're not able to use Bucky Irving as much just because he's not as big and isn't as versed in the passing, in the pass protection yet. So Baker Mayfield is over 35.5 passing attempts. That's at -110 right now. Also on DraftKings, I think that you can take both of those pretty comfortably.
Okay. Like both of those plays, certainly from that perspective. I'll say for mine, I am looking both at kind of from one from each side, but both on offense in this case. As we talked about Chris Godwin being emotional a lot week 1, I think that continues into week 2, specifically to try and find some advantages versus the Lions secondary, and also give Baker Mayfield those quick, easy outlets and those easy answers, specifically within structure. So Chris Godwin, 6+ catches is -106 over there on DraftKings. I mean on my pad on FanDuel. I like that play as well. And then the other one on the Lions side, I got Gibbs over 90 receiving scrimmage yards, I should say, rushing and receiving yards. I think he has a really good day. I think there's a little bit more of a Jahmyr Gibbs rather than compared to David Montgomery game, only from the standpoint of how, the Lions will probably have to run the offense, maybe a little bit of edge runs a little bit more than necessarily between the tackles, and also getting him out and creating some advantages with his game and quick outlets for Jared Goff to get the ball out of his hands when he may be facing some extra blitzes as far as Todd Bowles' defense is concerned. So those are my 2 looks that I like from this game coming up, and Bucs and Lions. But to wrap it up, man, I want you guys to go ahead and give me your pick and then an X factor that you'll be looking for, man. Go ahead, Meko, start us off.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm gonna go with my team, and I kind of got the Lions, winning. I think it'll be close early on, but I think they'll eventually pull away and kind of create some space between themselves and the Bucs. So I have the Lions winning 31-18. I just think that last week what we saw with the Lions offense kind of struggling and really not looking like themselves, I think that gets fixed this week. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown comes in with his hair on fire and really wants to make a statement. Three catches for 13 yards is not what he's about. And so I'm sure him and Jared Goff have had plenty of conversations about how he wants to, really, put on a show this upcoming week. So I kind of see that kind of going that way. And as far as an X factor go, I'm looking at Levi Onwuzurike. Levi is coming out of training camp and is looking the best he's looked since he was drafted by the Lions back in the 2nd round. And he was a terror even against the Rams. And so I think having that type of interior pass rush is going to be so key for even if the Rams or even if the Bucs do decide to go to a quick passing attack, you're going to need that interior pressure. So I'm with you, Spin. I think Aiden's going to get maybe 1 or 2 of his own, but I would definitely keep my eye on Levi Onwuzurike when he gets in to get those opportunities to rush the passer from the middle. He has really been on a tear this entire offseason.
All right.
That Levi pick.
And for me, my score prediction somewhat similar. I went 38-27 Detroit, and it's not something that I'm going to put $1 on myself because I don't bet against my team as a general rule. But as far as the X factor goes on the Bucs side, I'm actually looking at Cade Otton. So, a little bit more of a blocking tight end than a receiving tight end. However, where I can see him having value is, especially if they're going to bring pressure from Hutchinson's side, is even if he can just get off and do a little chip block and then kind of and then do either like a little stick route or a little curl over the middle. He can actually really help take the pressure off if by getting those like lightning quick passes that Brady used to throw when he was here. So Otton actually had one of his better times as a receiver with Brady for that reason. So Baker, the one criticism against him has always been that he tries to do too much, holds the ball for too long. So I think if they want to get Otton involved in that way, then we can at least slow down the defense early. But with I mean, Detroit to me is just top to bottom a more talented team than Tampa Bay. And I mean, that's not like me hating on my team. That's just fact. And the fact that we're going to have like at least 4 starters out, possibly 5. We might have another cornerback who's going through concussion protocol. Just the whole situation. It's just, it's a matchup that would have been tough enough for us to begin with. And then you have some of the key pieces out for what we like to do both offensively and defensively. And I think it's just water's too strong for the Bucs this week. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. Absolutely, as you should.
But look, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. So I'll go the other.
Like I'll split the difference. I hope you're right. I think this is going to be a little bit of a track meet from the standpoint of Todd Bowles is going to be aggressive. He's not going to sit back and allow things to happen to him. He's going to try and take the fight to the Detroit Lions offense. And I think that's going to create some explosive plays for the Lions to create on offense. And so I've got them 34, and I think that the Buccaneers have a solid day, but not a great day. So I got them with 23 on the flip side of it. But I do think the Lions end up winning this game fairly handedly. And you do see 1 or 2 Baker Mayfield, turnovers because they put him in a kind of a drop back situation on a consistent basis, and they throw some extra pressure at him. So I do think this is going to be an entertaining game, and certainly between 2 teams that have been very good for the past few years and are now kind of coming into a little bit of different eras for their recent franchise history, but it's also pretty cool as well. But I do want to thank both of you first and foremost for coming on Spin and Meko. Great to have you, Spin. Obviously, we will talk as far as Sunday quarterbacks are concerned on Win the Day, Sunday morning to preview. Please make sure you guys check out Pride of Detroit, Meko, and all those guys over there doing great things as far as all your coverage as far as Detroit is concerned, and specifically the Detroit Lions. Anything you guys want to say before we go ahead and get on out of here?
No, man, like I said, once again, really appreciate you guys having me on. Really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully we can come back and do this again.
Yeah, same here. Always love talking football. I always love talking football with people who like actually know what they're talking about. And who you can just have an intelligent back and forth with. And that's what this was. So I'm always up for intelligent sports conversations about anything. And so this was time well spent. I liked it. So thank you for having me. Thanks for having me on. And good luck to both teams on Sunday. We'll see.
Absolutely. And again, that's why I wanted to do this, because I wanted to make sure we highlight kind of one matchup that would be a lot of fun to talk about from X and O's and also storyline standpoint. And certainly great to reach out to a few people that, really key in on these teams and get into the specific details because I think it's a lot of fun for football fans to hear about. But yeah, once again, thank you both for coming on. Again, make sure you come back to Win the Day TV Sunday mornings. We will have a rundown of each of the marquee games that we have on the slate, and obviously bets with me, SpinDoc, Prop, and of course Sosa as well. Looking forward to it, man. But until then, that'll be us for week 2. Max marquee matchup. Hope you guys have a great day. Enjoy the weekend of football. Peace out.
Have a good weekend, all.